If you're a person with a disability that's looking to work in accessibility, I want to share some tips and insights on how you can do that so you can start making an impact in technology for people with disabilities. Digital accessibility is definitely a growing area of technology, but it has to grow by being led by people with disabilities, showing the innovations and solutions that need to be made since we're the people that this affects. So I want to help give some tips on how you can work in accessibility. And in order to do that, I want to first share some of my experience with how I've gotten to work in the field. Not so you can just hear my story, but so you can kind of fit yourself and put yourself into your experience, put your experience into what I've been through so you could see, oh, I've been through things like that. I could see myself using my lived experience that way, or I see my journey in your journey, whatever that might be. So to start, I grew up with perfect vision and I had no idea what this accessibility stuff was. At the age of 16, a genetic condition called LHON caused me to go through severe central vision loss. And with that, I had to grow a huge dependency on technology. I quickly had to learn screen readers, magnification devices, all sorts of different things, and it was very challenging. I quickly learned that assistive technology was complicated, but the more difficult part was not the technology, it was realizing applying it was even more difficult. You know, it's one thing to learn a screen reader, but another thing to learn how to navigate websites and websites that aren't even accessible. As I finished high school and went on to college, I saw even more areas that lacked accessibility. I would try to do my homework that was on some online resource, and there was zero screen reader support. And I would sometimes try to struggle with just magnification, but that was very, very challenging to do. And as I learned more about a screen reader or magnification tools, I started to see trends of problems that there were in certain areas that needed improvements. And also there's just a lot of despair realizing, I'm still a very smart student, but I can't do it because this assignment isn't accessible at all. And a lot of college was super hard because it wasn't learning the material that was the biggest challenge. It was making my coursework accessible, getting PDFs and PowerPoints converted, and figuring out how I could convert things on my own. And it would take a lot of extra time. And throughout the years, it was also very exciting because as much as there was a big challenge of things not being accessible, there also were improvements. There were slight things that I would see, oh wow, like now these buttons have labels on this website that I have to use for school. Or, oh, this is cool. There's more text-based PDFs and I can more easily export a text-based PDF as a Word document, whatever it may be. There was these slight changes where I started to realize, oh, like there is improvement happening in the areas. This is very exciting. And something that was very challenging though was I was, one of the only 2 or 3 blind students at a pretty big university and the only blind student in my class. And so it's not like the professors knew what they were doing about accessibility. It was a new area and thing for them to deal with. Can't expect them to. So it was up to me to communicate what I need because I wouldn't always know, how can I make this class work? I don't know how to do a class that's Excel on the board. What am I going to do to see that? The professor doesn't know either as they're teaching how to use Excel on their screen. But figure out, oh, what if I went on a Google Meet and you shared your screen so I could see the board on my computer and magnify? There are creative ways to kind of work around and find different solutions. Even when I was working on campus, I ran into accessibility challenges of I was doing this one job and there was a challenge of there was not really much screen reader accessibility for the program that we had to use at work. And so I had to work with the IT department to get me set up with a bigger monitor. And all this was so new to me. I was figuring it out similar to them, but coming up with what are these solutions and things that we could find. So These may seem like random examples, but I'm sure if you are someone who's blind or has a disability, you can relate to this problem solving that you may have to deal with. And it will come in very handy if you want to apply this to working in accessibility. So something else that I got to learn a lot about accessibility was honestly through content creation like this and discovering the power of the camera, because cameras were something I got into since my vision loss. And I guess I first saw that I could get Adobe Premiere Pro for free through school. And so I decided, oh, what if I tried to learn this program? I kind of like doing video editing in the past a little bit. And I've learned a lot about making things accessible. So what if I tried to make this program work? I don't totally know why I thought to do that, but I did. And so that kind of set me off on figuring out how can I make something that's a little more fun, accessible, and making videos. And then how can I try to get different cameras and work with my GoPro to make it work? How can I rent this nicer camera from school, see if I can make that accessible? It was a really good problem solving thing for me to do. And throughout that journey, long story short, I ended up getting connected with Adobe and doing some accessibility research studies with them. And through these opportunities, I was able to use my lived experience to share about a passion I had, how I made things accessible, and give feedback on this is what works for me, this doesn't, I like this feature, I don't like that. And keep in mind, I don't come from this technical software engineering or web developer background. I went to school for marketing, but I was able to communicate things to them that made a lot of sense that they were able to implement. So I'll come back to that a little more, but another example I want to share was one of my first jobs after college. While I was working there, I realized that the product that we were making, there was lots of opportunities for it to be more accessible and for the accessibility of it to help a lot of people. And so it wasn't part of my role to do this, but I reached out to somebody at the company to say, hey, how can we implement accessibility? I didn't know all about all the details of what it looked like. I didn't know all about web accessibility, but I knew it affected me and was something that was important. So I spoke up about it and had some good conversations about it, and also ended up having conversations with people in HR about inclusive hiring, my hiring process, what they could do better in the future. And it was really cool that they wanted to seek that out. And again, I'm sure there's a lot of people who can relate to maybe being the token blind person at their job, and you're having to explain more to people, do extra work to make things accessible, be an advocate, whatever that may be. But it was cool to use my lived experience to just help share with others and make a difference for other people down the road. And so as I continued in my career, I was working in the mountain bike industry and marketing, but then on the side, more and more, just getting into this camera stuff that connected a lot with, doing these accessibility research studies with Adobe. And after doing some of those, I was like, I want to do more of this. And so I got connected with an organization called Fable. I will link to Fable down below and any other the resources or things I talk about in this podcast. But getting connected with Fable was awesome, because Fable is a company that does like accessibility and usability testing for companies. And they only use people with disabilities as their testers and people who are first-hand assistive technology users. So this was a really cool way for me to grow in my knowledge of accessibility, but most importantly, my ability to communicate. Because some people early on were really pivotal for my growth into accessibility, to help me realize that I do know a lot about this area and field. It's just learning how to communicate it and realizing my lived experience is very valuable and people want that. And there are many businesses that want whoever you may be out there they want your lived experience and they want to help make products more accessible for you. It's just sometimes finding those people and learning how to communicate it. But back to Fable, what was really cool is, like I said, Fable uses assistive technology users as their testers. So I just had to use the assistive technology, the screen readers, and the magnification tools I already used, but go through certain tasks on certain websites or apps and just learn how to communicate what the challenges were that I was facing. And as I learned to better communicate, this helped me better formulate solutions so that the companies that this affected, they could be able to improve these things. And it was really exciting and fun. And, I've always been someone who I never thought was like a super technical person. Like, I love sports and outdoor things. And so it was interesting realizing how much I love this, because accessibility has brought so many challenges and frustrations. But I think that is kind of what makes it so special and valuable, to be able to help make improvements for other people, and myself included in that, and learn how to communicate these solutions. So as I got more into things, I wanted to learn more and more technical stuff. And long story short, I ended up liking it so much, I wanted to make a pivot and work in accessibility full time, because at the time I was working in marketing in the mountain bike industry. And so last year I decided to make this pivot, and it was quite a transition. And hopefully this transition can help give some insights on what worked for me and what could work for you as well. And so to start, I had some of this experience that was really helpful, but I also wanted to learn, okay, what does this look like full time? And so I decided to do a lot of networking. And networking is really, to me, just talking to people that do what you want to do, and seeing how you could provide value to them, how they could provide value to you, and just explore like what career you want, or just discovering kind of your passions and interests as you hear what others do and you see that sounds interesting, that does not. And so through that, I used LinkedIn a lot to find and connect with people, go to different accessibility meetup events online, as there are virtual ones, and just start to talk to people, to ask questions, to learn about the different paths of learning about web developers and accessibility, project managers, or whatever else it may be. I quickly found that it would be valuable to do some contract work opportunities so that I could get some experience doing things part-time in multiple places. And I have found success with that in a variety of jobs, transitioning from part-time to full-time. And for many of reasons, I find it very beneficial. And I think looking for contract part-time work is very beneficial. So throughout the year, I did a variety of contract roles, doing some work with open inclusion, helping with some accessibility and inclusive research studies with different companies, doing a big project with Fiverr, the freelancing platform, helping make their platform accessible, and also did some work with BIT, the Blind Institute of Technology, doing accessibility testing. And that's where I learned a lot about accessibility testing, auditing on the web, learned about web development, learned about the web content accessibility guidelines, and even did some training other companies on how they can implement digital accessibility themselves. So that was quite a lot of technical learning, and some of those words may sound new, but hopefully are areas to explore learning more about. I also did more work with Fable. I joined Google's Trusted Tester program. Again, I'll link to all these resources below if you want to check them out to learn more or to see if you could be a fit for any of these things. And it was really valuable to get a lot of experience different places. And to kind of explain where I ended up was I started part-time working for a company called Inclusive. Inclusive is an online learning platform built for people who are blind to learn occupational skills, technology skills, and other educational courses to remove barriers to employment. And I started doing contract work with them doing marketing. Last year, that evolved into doing some more accessibility testing, and long story short, turned into full-time work. And I now help lead marketing for Inclusive. And it's been quite a crazy journey because, I'm back in marketing, which is what I went to school for, but I get to combine it with these other passions of mine for technology, for accessibility, for impacting the blind community, which is really cool because there are a lot of technical things I do that relate to accessibility, but accessibility to help you kind of with what you're looking at and going into, it's not just about websites, making sure they're accessible, testing, auditing things. Accessibility to me is about making access to things available, and especially access to education, employment, and entertainment, which are kind of the biggest things that we need access to be like productive members of society. So I really enjoy kind of my area and where I get to work in accessibility. And so hopefully sharing my story and just the start of it so far can help see how you could get into accessibility and see how your story could align to it. But with that, I kind of want to give some more specific tips on how you can best enter this field, explore things, and more. The first and probably biggest thing you need to realize is just assessing your lived experience. If you're blind or have any disability, you need to realize that you have such valuable lived experience and insight and understanding of technology that companies want to be able to understand. And honestly, I think the talent of people with disabilities is not always valued as much as it could be in accessibility. And, there's not infinite opportunities out there. So there is an added competition, but, I used to hear if you have the same, I used to hear that if you have a disability and have the same resume as somebody else who does not have a disability, that they're probably going to pick somebody who doesn't have the disability. But I honestly think that's kind of silly and foolish in many ways, because I understand why that could be a possibility, but I think it's up to people in the disabled community to step up and show, no, I am more of an asset because I have this lived experience of understanding technology, of problem solving, of knowing things at a deeper technical level. I'm adaptable. All these things can set you apart. And this goes kind of for advice for any job, but I just think it's really important to look at where have you had troubles accessing technology in school, in work, in a hobby, whatever it may be. How did you overcome that barrier? How did you communicate that to people? How did you find a different solution? And I'm sure there's things, stories and things you could use in an interview or just on your resume. And I think it's being confident in your lived experience that maybe like, oh, I don't have experience in auditing websites for accessibility. It's like, but you've been navigating inaccessible websites for years as a screen reader user or whatever that may be. So know your lived experience. That's going to be the most important thing, because there's accessibility, but a big part of it is usability. It's one thing if technology works with the technology you use. It's another thing is the user experience enjoyable, and your lived experience is something that you have a competitive edge over the best accessibility web developer, whoever it may be. You have an edge on them because you know about the usability of things, what works best, because only you know that as someone who this technology actually affects. That's just what I think from my lived experience. Although your lived experience is super valuable when entering the field of accessibility, I think it's highly important that you focus on learning as much as you can, as that goes for anything that you're going to want to enter as in a job or career or explore something new in life. Something that is important to understand in accessibility would probably be web development. Accessibility is not just about making websites accessible, but a lot of the concepts relate to things for mobile app development or different types of software, or just certain general concepts of accessibility. And a great place to learn this, there's so many different areas online. I used Codecademy, as they have some really good free classes, but you could watch YouTube videos, you could just Google things, whatever it is. I would try to learn web development, especially HTML. And HTML is kind of the core structure of the internet, or more in terms of like websites. And when using a screen reader, you navigate by headings, links, buttons, whatever element that may be. You're probably familiar with a lot of HTML elements, but kind of diving deeper in how these elements work, what an accessible element looks like, I think is really helpful, because if you find out you like this, you could go more technical and become a web developer or software engineer. But if you're like, I just want to do tests and be able to communicate this to the people that will be able to solve these problems, having an ability to kind of communicate in this area, I think is very helpful. If you want to understand the visual aspect of web accessibility, then I would recommend learning a bit conceptually about CSS, which is the visual styling of websites. And in terms of web development, there also is JavaScript. And if you really want to get into things, you can learn more about that. But learning web development, I think, is very important and helpful. And there are a couple certifications that you can get for accessibility. There's the CPACC, Certified Professional in Accessibility Core Competencies. There's also the WAS, the Web Accessibility Specialist. And if you have both of those, you can be a certified professional of web accessibility, or CPWA or something. These things can be helpful to have for some people. I would say it's not necessarily the title that's important. It's sometimes the things that you can learn. Do I have these certifications? No, but it's something that I found helpful to learn the things that will lead you towards those certifications. DQ has some really helpful courses in accessibility. They are free if you have a disability. I can link to that resource below. And basically, these courses will cover helpful things to know, like the web content accessibility guidelines. You'll hear these talked about a lot. And I think it's important to understand these guidelines, but also know their guidelines. So you will, depending on the type of auditing or testing that you do in accessibility, you may have to rely on the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or I will refer to as WCAG. And I think it's important to know them so that you can test websites for this, but know that WCAG is kind of just a start and just addresses accessibility, not usability. That's where your lived experience comes in. But it's an important area to understand certain concepts of digital accessibility. But those other DQ courses are really helpful to understand other accessibility concepts and get your learning kind of moving in the right targeted direction. And in terms of other areas of learning, it really just depends what area of accessibility you want to go down. And that's what I want to talk about next. Because people can make accessibility seem like it's just web accessibility, like if you're someone who codes and develops software, or you're like a project manager that oversees it. But I think accessibility should be everybody's job and everybody's role in a company, not to make more work for people, but if everybody does a little part, then you can make a lot more change. So I think this is helpful to know, because you could be in a certain job right now and realize, I want to work in accessibility, but you could currently do things to help improve the accessibility of whatever product you're working on for your company. But I guess to be more brief with this, because this is all of these things are whole other conversations, but you could work more technically as a web developer or a software engineer, or you could work in QA, quality assurance, doing testing or auditing. Testing, auditing is kind of like the same word. You could use them interchangeably. You could work for a company, like inside of a company, testing their digital assets, or you could work for a company that does work for other companies testing their digital assets, making sure they're accessible, similar to like what Fable does or what I did at PIT. You could work as a project manager, oversee accessibility and its implementation. For me, I work in marketing now, but it's for a company that kind of deals with the world of accessibility. So whatever skill you have, you could bring to the field. And I think there should be more diverse roles and backgrounds coming into this field. It's not just the people creating things. It's all sorts of roles in the company that affect accessibility. No matter what path you go down when entering accessibility, the biggest thing or biggest skill to have is being a good communicator and knowing how to communicate solutions to accessibility and using your lived experience in that, and also using examples. And I really want to stress this point, because a lot of things we may know up here in our head, but to get them out and explain it to other people is something else. And it's an interesting thing, because sometimes you could get overwhelmed, like, this certain element on the website just needs to be this certain way, but I have no idea how to do it. It's like, don't worry. It's not all, may not be your job to do it. You just got to tell the person that does know how to do it, how they could fix it. And it's knowing just enough to communicate the problem until the person that's fixing it goes, oh, yes, I get what you're saying. Or it's knowing how to be good at Googling things and saying, what does an accessible labeled button element looks like, and then send that over to the person who's fixing things. And it's also important to be a confident communicator, because you may find something that would be an accessible solution to some problem, but it may take more work, more time, more effort. And you may say, just doing it this way will be good enough. And I say that because I found myself doing that a lot. And I think it's being confident to realize, no, this may take more time now. And it's taking more time because if it was done at the beginning, it would have taken less time. But that's all right, because we're fixing it now for moving forward to help more people. And it's important that you are confident communicating it, because it shows the value to other people that this is something that is important and helpful. And continually figuring out how to communicate things verbally as you talk with people, written as you're doing testing and writing down issues, is very, very helpful. And if you don't know how to communicate it, look it up and figure out how to more clearly explain things or find a better example. And another area of accessibility to learn about would be document accessibility. This is a growing need of people realizing PDFs aren't always accessible. It's kind of the biggest thing. Or how do you make this PowerPoint accessible? Or what's accessible Word document formatting? Really, really valuable, and something that you could do currently internally for your company. Also learning about how our mobile apps made accessible, because certain things like the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines don't best address mobile app accessibility. Learning more about how do you make accessible social media content in your marketing materials. Whatever that may be, there's many different teams and people involved with accessibility. So understanding those different areas is very valuable for entering this field to work in, or just being an advocate where you work. So I hope these tips were helpful to get your thinking going, your exploration of working in accessibility going. And I hope you can check out some of the resources I linked below, some other videos I've made on this area to help your learning. And I also just want to encourage you, maybe this is a pivot into a new area of work, or finding work in accessibility, or it's realizing where you're at in your current job. You can be an advocate for accessibility and lead the charge for your company, because it's going to take a lot of different people involved to make a change in accessibility, and it's going to have to be led by people with disabilities who affects, because we know technology can be our biggest challenge and frustration, or it allows us to access things and, just do what we got to do to be like anybody else, and enjoy the things others enjoy. And maybe we do it a different way, but we need to figure out and find those different ways of creating solutions and create a more digitally accessible world. So comment any questions that you have, and I hope you found this helpful.